Welcome back to the channel. Today we're looking at Tucker Carlson's explosive interview with Piers Morgan, where Tucker talks 9/11, Israel, Trump, Ted Cruz, and the so-called deep state. And trust me, whether you love Tucker or can't stand him, this one pulls the mask off a lot of the myths America's been fed for 24 years.
Now, Tucker, welcome back to Uncensored.
Thank you, Piers. Thanks for having me.
You're looking very sprightly, if I may say so.
Thank you. I think your intro is, you make a smart point that it is about trust. It's not a classic partisan division. And I'm really struck, we spent the last 4 months looking into 9/11, reassessing the explanations we were given by the government for 9/11. And one of the things that really struck me was the viciousness with which anyone who questioned it, certainly in the first several years, was treated with. You know, they were dismissed as crazy. By the way, I participated in that.
Yeah.
I attacked people who questioned 9/11, so I'm very culpable there. But there's a very simple way to dispel conspiracy theories, to make people with dumb ideas look foolish, and that's by disclosing what actually happened. It's by telling the truth. It's through transparency that you gain trust. It's not, I mean, if you ask your children, where were you last night? I'm not going to tell you. Does that engender trust? Of course not. It destroys it. And so there's also a sense in which it's outrageous that the U.S. government could presume to hide from the people who own the country, the citizens, the truth about an event that changed the nation more than any other in our lifetimes, any since the Civil War. It's a completely different country since 9/11. Millions of people died in the aftermath of 9/11. And so what exactly is the justification for not telling us what happened that day? And they haven't, period.
Well, let me play a trailer from the series. Let's take a look at this.
The official story on 9/11 is a complete lie. The 9/11 report is a joke.
You have the CIA following two men all over the planet, and then eventually even to America, right? And you don't tell the FBI. 9/11 Commission will cover it.
So what did happen? What did the government know? What did foreign governments know? There was a cover-up. Why? It's been nearly 25 years. It is time Americans learned what actually happened.
It's a great trailer. What to you, though, Tucker, are the biggest lies perpetrated on the American people from 9/11?
Well, the core lie is the 9/11 Commission itself, which was an instrument, a political instrument of the Bush administration run by a guy called Philip Zelikow. And from beginning to end, he stage managed the explanation for 9/11 in a way that benefited the neoconservative factions within the Bush administration. The point was to leverage the pain and outrage of that day and use it to convince Americans that we ought to invade Iraq, which of course had nothing whatsoever to do with 9/11. And he wrote the commission report with that in mind. And by the way, he wrote it before the investigation took place. He literally sketched it out before they knew what the facts were. And then during the course of the investigation, he systematically, I'm not guessing, by the way, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is the testimony of people who are directly involved in the commission. Chairman Tom Kean, the former governor of New Jersey, Republican governor, he stage managed the entire thing and prevented investigators from looking into like core questions. For example, the CIA was fully aware that many of the hijackers who committed 9/11 were in the United States. They had followed them, as the trailer suggests, around the world.
What jumps out is Tucker finally admitting what many of us already knew, that the official 9/11 story is a joke. The CIA tracked hijackers, ignored warnings, and then magically used the attacks as a green light to invade Iraq, a country that had nothing to do with it. And the kicker? The same U.S. politicians who scream about Iran today were the ones cheering on that war. It's the same playbook, recycled lies, just with a new target.
Around the world. 11 out of the 19 hijackers had visas for travel to the United States issued in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, at exactly the moment that John Brennan was the station chief for the CIA in Saudi Arabia. They knew that they were here. They didn't hide the fact that they were here. I mean, Khalid al-Mihdhar, who was a 26-year-old Saudi with the plane that hit the Pentagon, was in the San Diego phone book. And he was being followed by the CIA. I mean, this is all documented. And not just by the CIA, by foreign intel services, probably the British, possibly the French, definitely the Israelis. They knew. Now, I'm not alleging that they committed 9/11, but I am stating, because it's a fact, that they were aware the hijackers were in the U.S. and were planning a terror attack against the United States. And they never passed that information to the FBI, to local police, much less to the American public. And 3,000 people died as a result. So what is that? Huge parts of the 9/11 story were left out of the commission report. For example, what happened to Building 7 which was not only not next to the Twin Towers, which were hit by airplanes, but had a building in between itself and those buildings, collapsed that afternoon for reasons that no one has been able to explain since. You're not a lunatic for asking. There's no plausible explanation for how that building collapsed.
Well, so let's talk
That's
about
not
that.
even mentioned.
Well, let's
in
talk
the
about that for a
9/11
moment,
report.
because it's one of the many things that have raged since. If you look into the investigation into Tower 7, the findings of the investigation into it were that the North Tower, when it came down, had set off a load of fires in Building 7. And it was a steel structure and shouldn't have gone down, but it did. That these fires burned all afternoon, and I think it was about 5 o'clock in the afternoon or something. The tower eventually gave way to the welter of fires raging inside it. And it was the only time that had happened to a structure that was built in that way. However, there has been another tower very similar to that in structure, which has since gone down in Tehran. So it's no longer the only one. In other words, there is another example of a tower like that collapsing. So when it comes to the specific theory about that, what is the alternative explanation? I mean, if you're examining another theory other than the one that the investigation concluded was simply that the North Tower came down, fires were set off in Tower 7, and then it eventually collapsed, what is the other theory which we should give more credence to?
I don't know. I don't know that the onus is on me or anyone who seeks the truth about what happened to come up with an alternative theory. The onus is on federal authorities to explain why, for example, they never investigated it. Why, for example, the rubble and the steel from that building was carted off within hours and sent out of the country to Asia. Why, for example, an analysis done not by kooks, but by chemists found traces of explosive material in the dust from that day. Why structural engineers who have kind of no skin in this game came to the conclusion that that just couldn't happen based on all available evidence. And that none of that is addressed at all or even mentioned in the 9/11 report. So, and there are all kinds of anomalies, as I know that you're fully aware, and there are possible explanations to explain all of them. For example, the BBC report on air saying the building had fallen when it hadn't fallen yet. There are all sorts of reasons to wonder, like, what the hell is this? But it's not incumbent on us to provide explanation. It's incumbent on the people running the government and running the supposed investigation into this to tell us, like, what was that? And
And then there's Trump, Mr. America First. Let's be honest, Trump was never America first. He was Israel first. He bent over backwards for Netanyahu, handed over Jerusalem, and still pretends he's some anti-establishment hero. Tucker hinting that he had to apologize to Trump just shows how fragile that whole MAGA circus really is. Call it what it is. Ego wrapped in a red hat.
I have a very open mind. The reason I'm interested to watch your documentary series, I have a genuinely open mind. And actually, I would say it's been more opened generally about this kind of thing since the COVID pandemic. That I was too, I think, credulous about what the authorities were saying through the pandemic to my detriment. You and I have had this conversation. So I'm actually have a very open mind about this. I mean, on the specifics, for example, the BBC report you mentioned was based on a false Reuters report that they retracted soon afterwards and said it shouldn't have gone out. And the building, you could see the building behind the BBC journalist. So it was obviously ludicrous. CNN did the same thing. But having been in the news game as you have, on big breaking news stories, fog of war stuff happens. And if it was a genuine error by Reuters, okay. I remember, for example, just as a comparison, I remember being on air at CNN when the hurricane came through, Hurricane Sandy burst through Manhattan. If you were probably at Fox then, I think. But if you remember, half the lights went out in Lower Manhattan. And I remember a report coming from CNN that the stock exchange was underwater. And that had an immediate impact on global markets. And it turned out that was a false report. So these things can happen. In terms of your overview from everything you've unearthed in the documentary, though, have you unearthed any evidence that there was any suggestion anywhere of an inside job? Or is the stuff that you're talking about in relation to CIA and the fascinating details of these two people in particular they were following, is that more cock-up than conspiracy? In other words, was it a gigantic cock-up that after bin Laden had already had one go at the World Trade Center, that there was just not a collective effort by the CIA, by FBI, by other intelligence agencies around the world to stop him succeeding with a second attempt? So is it cock-up, or do you think there is merit to suggestion that some people somewhere must have known more than we've been told?
Well, we know that people did know more than we've been told. I mean, somebody shorted the airlines and a bunch of the banks that were affected. Now, this is not a conspiracy theory. It's not a guess. This is publicly available information. Now, the FBI found out the identity of the person or institution that shorted these events on 9/11 and made a huge amount of money by doing that, but never released that information. So why can't we know who clearly had foreknowledge? I mean, if you're shorting American Airlines a week before 9/11, when no one knows it's coming, I think you should have to explain why you did that. And if you're shorting Barclays and banks that were affected by 9/11, why can't we know who you are? These are public markets, by the way. This is not private equity. This is publicly traded equities. So I wonder about that. So clearly, yes, there was foreknowledge. By the way, there was a team, this is according to the FBI, by the way, this is the FBI saying, there was a team of clearly intel-connected foreigners who were arrested after 9/11, as you well know, videotaping the terror attacks. I'm almost verbatim quoting from the FBI assessment of this. And the
Tucker
FBI
Carlson's appearance on Piers Morgan Uncensored hits on one of the most controversial topics in American history, the 9/11 attacks, and the official story we've all been told. Carlson argues that the government's version of events is incomplete at best and deliberately misleading at worst. He points out that the CIA had tracked several of the hijackers before 9/11, knew they were inside the United States, and still failed to share that information with the FBI or local police. Thousands of Americans died, yet those responsible for ignoring the warnings faced no consequences. Instead, the tragedy was leveraged by the Bush administration and its neoconservative allies to justify the invasion of Iraq, a country that played no role in 9/11. Carlson also raises questions about Building 7, the collapse of which remains one of the least explained events of that day. He highlights the fact that evidence was quickly removed, potential traces of explosives were found, and the incident was barely addressed in the official 9/11 Commission report. Whether you agree with Tucker or not, his central point stands. If the government wants to dispel conspiracy theories, it should stop hiding information and start telling the full truth. The interview also connects the dots between 9/11 and the modern political divide. For Carlson, the real dividing line is no longer left versus right. It's about trust. Do you trust the government, the intelligence agencies, and the official narratives? Or do you believe these institutions lie to protect their own interests? This distrust explains the fractures inside MAGA, the skepticism around U.S. wars, and the growing pushback against unconditional support for Israel. And that's where Trump comes in. Despite branding himself as the anti-establishment outsider, Trump acted like the ultimate establishment president when it came to Israel. He gave Netanyahu everything he wanted, moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, greenlighting settlements, and tearing up international agreements. The irony is that while Trump rants about the swamp, he was more than happy to serve the interests of AIPAC and Israel's right-wing government. Carlson's reluctance to call that out directly shows just how untouchable the Israel lobby remains in U.S. politics. Carlson even touches on financial anomalies around 9/11, like the short selling of airline stocks just days before the attacks. He notes that someone clearly had foreknowledge, made a fortune, and was never publicly named. Add to that the reports of foreign intelligence-linked individuals caught videotaping the attacks, and you're left with more questions than answers. Yet instead of demanding accountability, critics are told to shut up or risk being smeared as anti-American or worse. What this interview really reveals is the ongoing battle over narrative control. Governments and media elites insist that questioning 9/11 is off limits, yet at the same time they refuse transparency. That contradiction feeds distrust and fuels alternative theories. Carlson isn't saying he knows exactly what happened, but he's demanding answers, and that's something every citizen should want. In the end, the questions around 9/11, U.S. wars, and Israel's influence aren't just historical debates. They shape current politics. Every time politicians beat the drums of war, whether against Iran, Russia, or anyone else, the shadow of 9/11 looms in the background. It's the template for fear, manipulation, and endless conflict. So what do you think? Is Tucker Carlson right that the U.S. government has been hiding the truth about 9/11? Or is this just another distraction while the real power brokers, from Wall Street to Tel Aviv, keep pulling the strings? Share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unfiltered political commentary.